This is Caregiver Storyteller, produced by CaringKind, the heart of Alzheimer's caregiving. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Caregiver Storyteller, a storytelling podcast about Alzheimer's and dementia caregiving. I'm Dr. Ann Kenny, and I'll be interviewing caregivers to get their stories about Alzheimer's and dementia caregiving. Occasionally, I'll also interview authors, advocates, researchers, healthcare professionals, and people with Alzheimer's and dementia to hear their stories too. So are you ready? Here we go.
For inviting me.
Thank you. So this is Caregiver Storyteller. So we'll want to hear some of your stories, but why don't you introduce yourself first and then we'll get into it.
Okay, so I'm Lou Falcone, and I basically have had 4 careers. The first one was as a singer and teacher, first and second ones. The third one for the last 50 years has been as an international public relations consultant for classical music. And now my focus in my 4th act, as I call it, is on caregiving awareness and awareness for Lewy Body Dementia in particular.
Okay, good. So tell me a little bit more about this 4th act. Can you?
Yes, I never intended to write a book, ever. I was the person who said, never will that happen. Well, the answer very clearly is never say never, because here I am. It's actually been almost 3.5 years since my husband, Nicky Zann, died. And he was the catalyst for the book. Before Nicky died, he said to me about 2 or 3 months before, you have to write. And I kind of swallowed hard and thought, what does that mean? But because he had Lewy Body Dementia, and because, as you know, but your listeners may not know, Lewy Body Dementia goes in and out, meaning that one day you're 100% yourself and very lucid, as he was in the moment that he said that to me. And the next moment, you don't even know who the person sitting next to you is. And so I tucked that away, and I didn't think too much about it until Nicky passed in July of 2020 from Lewy Body Dementia with Parkinsonian aspects. Mm-hmm. And it was at that moment that it suddenly hit me. I have to do something. Mm-hmm. And what I have to do is write. And the writing became a cathartic experience. It became part of my grieving process. Mm-hmm. And it became a lifeline for me, in that I was able to put my story on paper with the hope that other caregivers might benefit from the experience. Yeah. That was the purpose.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, it is a beautiful book. It's a lovely read. It doesn't hold back, right?
No, it doesn't. No,
but that's what we need to hear, I think.
I agree with you. I think that over the years, as I've read various accountings of things of this nature, I felt that the whole truth wasn't there.
Yeah. Always.
Sometimes yes, but most of the time not. Yeah. And if you were going to do this, you really needed to tell the whole truth.
Right.
And I always considered myself one of the most private people on the planet. And indeed, until I wrote this book, I was. Mm-hmm. Absolutely was. Now I'm not. And the gloves are off, and I go in swinging because people seem to want the transparency. They relate to the fact that the vulnerability is there. And because they've told me on the road when I speak that because I'm vulnerable, they dare to be vulnerable.
And I think that the journey often transforms us. So where you may have been that private person, I mean, there's a lot of downside to the dementia journey, but one of the upsides is that potential transformation as a caregiver, which I think comes through beautifully in your book.
I appreciate that. I think that as you're on the caregiving journey, and my journey with caregiving started when I was 10 years old. My father had a massive stroke, and he was 37 years old. So he was a very young man at the height of his existence.
Mhm.
And that stroke changed all of our lives in that he never spoke again because he couldn't. The damage was too extensive. And I became the caregiver for my dad and my younger siblings. But, as a 10-year-old, you don't know any different. You just rise to the occasion and there we go.
Right.
And so caregiving to me was something that was not foreign. And over the years, caregiving for artists, it's another form of caregiving. It's all been there. But when you caregive for the person that you love most in the world, it is a very different experience. And I think what one realizes is that it's faith and love that take over. And in that moment, you become secondary and the person you love becomes primary. That doesn't mean you don't take care of yourself. Of course you have to.
Right.
But you need to go into that person's world and leave your world while you're caring for that person, because they require a different set of caring. They require you to enter with them and make them as comfortable as possible.
And that's a lesson that isn't part of most other caregiving. Would you like with your father or the artists? How did you learn? Where did you go to find some of that information?
I call it seat of the pants learning. It's really improvisation. And as a singer, as an actress, whatever, I was very good at improvisation. I always loved improvisation. And it stood me in good stead as an older adult in this context, because each day you needed to take as a new adventure, a new experience, and you needed to find the strength within yourself to deal with that experience. And it was improvisation, but I also found in the beginning, I found it very hard to find support. The neurologist that we had who diagnosed Lewy body dementia brilliantly. I mean, he knew from the onset with a cognitive test and with watching Nicky walk. He said quite definitively, this is Lewy body dementia with Parkinsonian aspects. And then he confirmed his diagnosis by doing a DAT scan, it's DAT scan, and a REM sleep test. REM sleep disorder is one of the things that does appear in Lewy body dementia. And that is, for those who don't know, when you're dreaming, when you and I dream, we dream and we don't move, we don't act out. Right. With REM sleep disorder, someone who has it actually is, if they're dreaming, they're punching you, they are actually punching out. So it's acting out what they're dreaming. And so with those two tests, there was a confirmation of what he had originally said. However, when we went back for the follow-up visit, and I said, what can I expect? What do I need to know? There was radio silence. He wouldn't open up. And I asked Nicky to leave the room, which he did, because I thought maybe he wouldn't want to tell me in front of the person who was experiencing all this. Still, nothing. Not even so much as we have a person that you can see, perhaps a social worker, but nothing. And all he said was, and this actually became prophetic, what he said was, you will learn more from people who have the disease and who are going through it than you will from any other resource. And I walked out of there feeling a little bit helpless and quite confused, and I didn't know where to turn. And then my very good friend, David Hyde Pierce, said to me, do you know about CaringKind? And I said, no, but I looked it up. I found it. I found them to be incredible, because this is an organization that is basically helping people who are dealing with Alzheimer's and related dementia. And while it focused at that time, that was 2019, while it focused at that time more on Alzheimer's, it has expanded to embrace other dementia quite seriously. And so I went and I took those classes. And I was with caregivers, like-minded people who were dealing with things that I was dealing with, some dealing with far lesser, some dealing with far greater, but we were all in it. And I found that incredibly helpful. And I might add that it was also free. They were giving these services to help people. And I so admired that. And one of the things they said to me is, do you know about the Lewy Body Dementia Resource Center and its founder, Norma Loeb? I said, no. They gave me a phone number. I called the phone number. Norma herself, Norma Loeb, answered. Now here she is, the founder of this organization and the doing all the heavy lifting. And she answers the phone herself. Incredibly helpful, offered support groups. There was at that time one support group a month. I went, it was live at that moment. I went to those monthly support groups. And a couple of months into it, I said, you know, it seems to me that we're all on the same page. We're all in need, and we all need more than once a month. And so I suggested that perhaps we do twice a month, and that I would host. I had access to a conference room in the building I live in, that we could come there on the second round every month. And that's how the second one started. So everybody was being honest. Everybody was being open. Nobody held back in this group. And it was a miracle for me because the help was amazing. Being able to foresee some things that might happen, being able to share things that had happened. It was all part of this journey and a great part of it.
So between getting some information and your improvisational abilities, you were able to put kind of your and Nicky's care together.
Yes, it was a journey. It was a loving journey. It could be a frustrating journey. You know, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, oh, it just all went so smoothly. And no, it doesn't. And there are moments when you, the caregiver, want to scream at the top of your lungs. And I would, to my caregiving buddies in my group sessions, I would recommend the following: that they take a pillow, that they scream an expletive into it, preferably the F word, because that releases all the endorphins, you know, everything just flows out. Heck, darn, and damn, just don't do it. So sorry, but they don't. And then to refresh, I would take a lavender sachet and I would inhale, calm, and then go back into the lion's den, so to speak, so that I could face the next round of whatever was coming.
Right. So do you want to tell us a story of maybe a bad day, like so that the listeners can identify with?
Sure. Absolutely.
Because there are bad days. And then of course I want to end, I don't want to end, but I want to hear one of the lovely days.
Yes, absolutely. So a bad day, a particularly bad day, was when it wasn't too far into the diagnosis. And I always tried to have at least once a week a lunch with dear friends, no more than 2 other people. But that kept things stimulated, and at least people understood, because I would preface our meetings with our guests by telling them, not in Nicky's presence, but when he was not there, I would tell them what he was experiencing, what this disease did, and perhaps how they could be helpful in talking to him, so that they were prepared. In other words, that was important. And so on this particular day, I would always let Nicky spend at least 2 hours every morning getting ready. When I say I would let him, I would encourage that he could bathe and dress, but it got harder and harder, and it would take up to 2 hours, because buttoning a shirt, for instance, was incredibly difficult at a certain point. But as long as he could do it, I would just monitor by peeking around the corner, not invading the space, just watching to make sure there wasn't frustration, that he was okay. And so on this particular day, I did what I always did and came in about 20 minutes before we were to leave and found Nicky just sitting, not dressed. He had showered, but he wasn't dressed. And I said, Nicky, come on, we have to get together because we're meeting these people in 15 minutes. And he rose up and he took me by the shoulders and he said, Mary Lou, don't you realize I'm dying?
No.
And I took a deep breath and I realized how serious this was. And I looked him in the eye and I said, Nicky, I do realize. However, we're all dying. You're just not dying today, which broke the ice. And he chuckled at that. Thank goodness. But that was a particularly bad day.
Yeah.
You know, when the admission was there, because initially it was when he was first diagnosed, he said three things. The first thing he said was, we have had a great run. We cannot be sad. Beautiful phrase. The second thing he said was, I've always wanted to meet your father, and now I'll have my chance. My father died in 1981. So Nicky, that was his way of letting me know that he was dying. And the third thing he said, which I was able to maintain and through the grace of God, and I am so grateful. And he said, please, I know it's going to get rough. Help me to keep my dignity.
Beautiful.
And that was an incredibly important ask from him.
Yeah.
And incredibly important for me to remember every single day. Because it's about dignity. It's about preserving that dignity. The person that you're caring for is there in some way, shape, or form, even when they can't relate, even when they can't speak to you, even when they can't let you know that they're perceiving. My belief is, I have no scientific evidence, but my belief is that the gentle touch, the touch of a hand, the kiss on the cheek, the mellowness of a voice, it does come through.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. But what a beautiful thing to have kind of a guiding principle, so that a touchstone, as it were, on the days where things are a little bit difficult and you are making decisions that don't feel comfortable.
Yes.
If you can come back to what Nicky asked of you, which is help me maintain my dignity.
Right.
I'm sure it help. I mean, it's difficult to make decisions for oneself, but
Yeah.
so many more magnitudes more difficult to make decisions for another.
And when you can include your loved one in the decision making, it really is important to do it.
Right.
But with not too many options.
Right.
So
So as not to overwhelm.
Exactly. Would you like grilled cheese or would you like a little pizza? You know, something not too much, just what you know that person can contend with in that moment. And then there are other moments when you just need to make what I call lovingly an executive decision and just do it, whatever it is.
Right. And when dementia has taken away the ability to make executive decisions, I mean, we don't want to be overbearing, but that is a piece that needs to be filled in sometimes, some of those executive decisions.
Absolutely. And things like, you know, we're going to do XYZ. Maybe the rephrasing of that. Would it be okay if we did XYZ? Would you be comfortable with, you know, there are ways of doing it without being autocratic.
Yeah. Right.
And in the moment you want to just get on with it. Let's just do it.
Right.
But that is not helpful. It really doesn't help.
One of the things you know, in your book, one of the feelings I guess I got over and over was that you made sure that you were gentle in that approach. And I
Yes.
know that every day that's not an easy thing,
No,
but
I
that
am
gentleness allowed Nicky his dignity. Again,
right.
yeah.
Right. I am by nature and by what I've done in life, I'm a take charge person.
Mhm.
I have an idea, I execute it, it's thoroughly thought out, and then it becomes a reality.
Mhm.
When you're caregiving, even though you're in charge, so to speak, it can't come off with that authority of a take charge person.
Right.
It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And what does work is that gentleness.
Right.
And I was able to actually do a redo, because as a 10-year-old, I thought that I could make my father speak, that I could work with him, as I was encouraged to do by the rehabilitation center. I mean, that's a kind of it's a thing of the 50s, which would never happen today. But in the 1950s, when the rehab center had finished what they felt they could do, and the insurance money, let's face it, the insurance money
Right.
ran out. They basically said, you've got a bright 11-year-old, she can work with you, and gave me the instructions on how to do speech therapy, which I felt I could do. I could really help. I could make this, there's a lot of I in here. I could make this happen. And I couldn't.
No.
And being insistent and a cheerleader to a degree, but trying to will it didn't work.
Yeah.
And what I got in later life was the gift of a redo.
Yeah. So, and a healing, I'm sure, for that 11-year-old.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
That, I forgave the 11-year-old for not being able to accomplish the goal, but also for being a zealot.
And
Yeah.
and nurtured her in realizing that's a big ask of an 11-year-old.
It's an
Without
impossible
a
ask.
world experience,
Yeah.
to put the language of your father in your hands,
Yeah.
that's a
I mean, today that wouldn't happen,
no.
and it probably shouldn't have happened then, but it did.
Right.
And so, you dealt with it, and you dealt with the aftermath, and you, in my case, as I said, I got the redo
Yeah.
of it.
Both forgiveness and love back to
Absolutely.
a
Absolutely.
little Mary Lou. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know my father understood. I
Yeah.
mean, he was, his cognitive ability, interestingly enough, from that stroke was not impaired at all.
Mm.
It was simply he wasn't able to speak.
Yeah.
And that must have been such a hell for him. But always with a smile, always with cheerfulness from him. I mean,
Mhm.
he was a great role model in so many ways, as was my mother. My mother was a model of patience and doing and caring and keeping it together. And my dad was was a model of patience under enormous adversity.
Oh, that's beautiful. So, and then you were a model of patience when
Um,
you and Nicky were on your journey together.
well, it's interesting you phrase it that way, because I considered myself one of the most impatient people on the planet, especially as regarded myself. I would have patience with others, but I had no patience with myself. And I have learned that the lesson that Nicky's journey taught me, among other things, was the lesson of patience, not just for the people that I'm dealing with, but patience for myself. And that's something I did not have.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What other lessons do you think you learned from caregiving with Nicky? Care partnering, really.
Yeah, care partnering. Well, I think what I learned was that um, every day is a gift.
Mhm.
To use it as fully and as lovingly as you can. I learned that the pettiness that creeps into all of our lives, depending upon what professions we're in, etc., is just that. It's pettiness,
Mhm.
and can be dismissed quite easily.
Mhm.
That I find myself being annoyed with people who don't look beyond themselves.
Okay.
When it's always about I, and everything revolves around the I, it's a pretty dismal existence. And I've always been sensitive to that. I is something that I don't readily use. It's we.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in writing this book, I needed to find a way around the I, me, and my, because I get so bored with reading, and then I did this, and then I did that, and then I, and then my, and for me, that is, it just isn't comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that I found around that is to write in the voices of people who meant something incredibly important in my life. It was a way of avoiding the I, me, my, but more than that, it was a way of honoring them
Mm-hmm.
and what they meant on my journey and how important they were to me.
Mm-hmm. Their story in your life.
Their story in my life.
Yeah.
Yes.
Beautiful. Okay. One thing that you do address in your book is Nicky's death. And I don't
Yes.
think many books do. And then your reaction after Nicky's death.
Yes.
I like that.
The feeling that death is a verboten topic is not one that I embrace.
Mhm.
I embrace the feeling of, let's talk about it, because death doesn't have to be ugly,
No.
and death doesn't have to be scary, and death doesn't have to be something horrible. It is inevitable. It is the one thing upon which we can count. At
Mhm.
some point, we are all going to die. Period. The end.
Right.
But the more you open up about it, the more you talk about it, the more you make it a friend and not an enemy,
Mhm.
it becomes something that can have such deep and incredibly important meaning. And Nicky's death and the process of Nicky's death
Mhm.
was incredibly important to me.
Mhm.
And we went on the journey together. And I don't mind talking about the last of it because I find it incredibly beautiful and meaningful and maybe helpful.
Mhm.
And that is that 1 week before Nicky died. Now, I mentioned that Lewy body goes in and out of consciousness, meaning one day you're 100% yourself, the next day you're not. You don't even know who the person standing next to you is. And the first time that happens, I have to say there was an occasion where one day Nicky said, I said, Nicky, do you know who I am? And he said, no, but that's okay.
Mm.
And I took a deep breath and I realized he didn't. And then the next day it was, the two Mary Lou's are here. So he was seeing me in double
Mhm.
Capgras syndrome. And
Yeah.
so I went with that. I went with whatever the mode was. And toward the end, he was getting more and more quiet, and I recognized that. And 1 week before he died, our then 3-year-old godson and his mother, our niece, Amanda, came to pay a visit. Amanda just had this premonition that she needed to bring Andrew, and she was so right. And Andrew came in with his hearty greeting, which was always, hello, Pirate Nicky. And
Oh.
Nicky responded by being silent. And normally his response would be, hello, Pirate Andrew. And there was this quiet. And Andrew walked up. Nicky was seated in a chair. He walked up. He knelt in front of his knees. He hugged Nicky's knees, put his head on his lap, and just stayed. A good minute, which is a long time for a child.
Mhm.
He then moved aside and began playing quietly. I fixed a little lunch for everybody. Nicky ate 2 bites and said he was tired. He needed to rest. Went back to bed. Fine. The kids went to say goodbye. There was a big hug while Nicky was in bed. It was a very beautiful moment. and he then slept. I came over and I realized I needed to put hospice into place. I called our brilliant doctor, John Cahill, whom I adored, and he helped me put hospice into place that afternoon. Those 2 bites of lunch that Nicky had were the last bites he ever ate. He refused to eat. A nurse friend of mine who was also going through this with her husband, with Lewy Body, said to me, when someone doesn't want food, do not force it. Do not be the Italian mama saying, oh, come on, you have to eat. Just don't do it. 2 days later, he stopped drinking altogether. That evening, I called in everybody from the family and very close friends to say their goodbyes, and they did. And Nicky, who was in bed, they all went in one by one to say goodbye, and he acknowledged as best he could. And we all then gathered in the living room. Nicky's in the bedroom, and I hear a voice saying, Mary Lou, Mary Lou. And I go in, and of course it's Nicky, who says, please put a robe on me, put me in the transport chair, bring me into the living room. Now, he had not been out of bed. And I said, okay, we can do this. And I did it, wheeled him into the living room, at which point there were about 7 people there. By name, one by one, he acknowledged each person and said, thank you. Then looked at me and said, I'm very tired. I need to go back. Wheeled him back. That was on a Thursday. By Saturday, I had closed down the shop, so to speak, because I realized that if you keep bringing people in, someone like Nicky will always try to rally to be the host, because that's what he was. And so I said, shop is closed, but in the Catholic faith, and we are Catholic, last rites is a very important element. But nobody would come into the home because it was COVID. And the priests were in their communities and couldn't do it. So I called an acquaintance, Father John, and I said, have you ever done last rites by speakerphone? And he said, no, but why not? I said, good. So we made an appointment. He called in, he did the last rites, and then he said, and it's not complete unless there's an anointment of the palms and the forehead with oil. And I am empowering you to do that. And the reason I will not ever give Father John's full name is because, first of all, I was a woman, and secondly, a lay person. So that is breaking the code of the church. But you know what? It was a dire moment. It needed to be done. He bless him.
Right. The intent was
there, and we did it.
Right.
And then it was a quiet couple of days, and peacefully, I was sitting on a Tuesday morning, again, 1 week later from the beginning of this journey, the death journey, sitting by his side. I had never taken him out of our bed. I had always slept next to him throughout all of it, and always held his hand. And this particular morning, I was sitting on a chair next to the bed, holding his hand, and the breathing was becoming more and more labored, and you could tell that life was leaving, but it hadn't left. My phone pinged, sitting next to me. I literally looked over for a split second, and in that split second, he left. And when he left, of course, there was a sadness. But there was also a joy that he had gone in peace to a better place.
Yeah.
And that is something that I treasure. I treasure that I had the ability to be there and to watch the exit in a meaningful and incredibly beautiful way.
I'm so glad. Yeah.
Yeah. So death doesn't have to be, I know it has many faces. I know it has many forms.
It does.
But I think that sometimes you can bring a peacefulness to the person
Mhm.
so that the peacefulness gets
Mhm.
incorporated.
Right. You knew not to have a circus because
Right.
that wasn't what Nicky needed.
No.
And you honored that.
And I think it's important. I think it's
Right.
very important.
And others want, and I mean, others want that crowd.
You have
It's
to read
different
it.
for everyone. Right.
Absolutely. And also, you know, in some, I was given good advice along the way. Somebody said to me when the people from the mortuary come in, you know, ask them not to zip the body bag up.
Mm-hmm.
And these gentlemen came in and they were wonderful. And I asked them and they said, oh, we're not even going to put a body bag. You know, we'll wrap him in blankets.
Nice.
And it was, you know, it was lovely.
Yeah.
And they also commented because my dearest and oldest friend was with me, waiting in the shadows for whatever I needed, which was wonderful. And when Nicky passed and she came in and we got him prepared, we got him ready to leave the house. And that was absolutely dressing him as he would have wanted to leave, which was incredibly important.
Good.
And these two gentlemen who came in took one look and said, ah, what an elegant gentleman. And I knew that the elegant gentleman was smiling from above because that was important. Again, dignity
Right.
to the end.
Beautiful. Oh, thank you, Mary Lou. I think this is going to help so many people. Before we close, what advice, what little tidbit would you give somebody as they begin their journey, whether they're living with Lewy body dementia or caring for somebody who's living with Lewy body dementia or another dementia?
I would say the most important phrase I can share is, you are not alone.
That's beautiful. And
That's it.
it's true. It's so true. There are people that want to help you.
Yeah.
And I think we don't want to burden people, is what some people say. You don't want to be vulnerable, but
it's vulnerability that allows you to grow. That's what I learned.
Yeah. I too was a caregiver, and I came out a different person because of that learning to become vulnerable.
Yes. Yes. And knowing that there is always someone there who will care and who will help.
Yeah.
You are not alone.
We're not alone. That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Anne. I really appreciate it.
I hope people will get I Didn't See It Coming and learn from much more of your wisdom and beautiful stories that are in that book.
Well, it's all about storytelling, because I think you remember stories. You don't remember facts and figures necessarily, but stories you remember. So if the stories help, then I have done my job.
You have. You've definitely done your job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for listening. If you'd like to share your story, go to caringkindnyc.org/podcast. Maybe we'll use your story on the show. We'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe to this podcast and leave some glowing feedback. We love positive reinforcement. I'm Dr. Ann Kenny, and you're listening to Caregiver Storyteller, produced by CaringKind,